apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this day after Memorial Day, Tuesday, May 28th, 2019. I am your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you decided to join us for today, this Millennial Roundtable of Point of View. And we have got quite a show for you here during the first hour. We'll kind of run through some of the recent headlines of the day that are kind of making waves, specifically an Army tweet that prompts stories of harmful effects of military service, according to New York Times. We'll kind of dig a little bit deeper into that. We'll also talk a little bit about the legacy of Bill Buckner. He was a batting champion, infamous for a World Series gaffe. He died over the weekend at the age of 69, and we remember him. We remember his worst moment. He will go down in history for that worst moment, but because of his grit, he continued to make so much more of his career. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. There's some interesting science that revolves around that as well, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll also transition over to a little bit about what's happening at Mount Everest right now, the world's tallest peak. Another climber has died. That makes 11 climbers have died in the past 10 days. There's a viral photo that's gone that is just spreading like wildfire right now that reveals a significant line that just lines the top of that peak, making its way up to the summit. And we'll talk a little bit about the desire for risk. And there's some really interesting research on that I think will be illuminating to what we see happening at Everest, and then especially when we consider the Christian life as well. But we'll also be joined in studio by Girien Salazar, the Faith and Education Coalition, for our monthly update on higher education from a Hispanic perspective. Really looking forward to Girien being in studio with us. But without further ado, let's jump into the news, because the day after Memorial Day, there was a tweet that was sent out by the U.S. Army that generated quite an unlikely response that I think will be very interesting for us to consider. The U.S. Army, according to the New York Times tweet, prompts stories of harmful effects. The United States Army posted a video on Twitter featuring a scout in fatigues who said his service gave him the opportunity to fight for something greater than himself, making him a better man. In its next tweet, the Army opened the floor and asked, "How has serving impacted you?" Instead of hearing some of the benefits of serving, what happened is that you had a significant number of veterans that began to respond, specifically calling out what some felt like was the platform to be able to talk about the darker consequences of military service for soldiers and their families. As tweet after tweet described lifelong health complications, grief over loved ones lost, sexual assaults gone unpunished, and struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. They fought bravely so that we might live freely. However, as we know all too well, the battle continues once they get home. Recent research has shown that traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress disorder afflict an estimated 30% of the 2.7 million former troops. They suffer from hearing loss, missing limbs, memory lapses, sensitivity to bright light noise, and have an increased risk of suicide and depression. But it's not just limited to the veterans. Their children often suffer from social isolation, sometimes lacking fond childhood memories because of present parental struggles. Riddled with anxiousness and higher levels of stress, these children worry about the health of their parents. Veterans served our country valiantly, and their families often bear the brunt. Andrew Delbanco observed that the future is always at stake in how we understand the past. These veterans risked their future so that we might have one. We can't change the past, obviously, but we can provide help in the present generously, understanding from the biblical narrative to carry one another's load. And as we continue to think about yesterday coming out of the weekend, considering those that gave the ultimate price for our country, I want to spend a little bit of time before we go to break telling you about one of my dear friends. His mom called him Joshua. The brothers called him Twitch, but today we call him a hero. I met Twitch during Rush Week, my freshman year at Austin Peay State University, when my nerves met his excitement in the back of a U-Haul with 50-plus other people. Such rides to crash a rival fraternity party have a way of bringing people together. That ride was the first of many experiences I had with Twitch. He made foam parties at the University of Tennessee at Martin unforgettable, and random nights playing video games on mute with classic rock on blast memorable. Everyone has a Twitch story. We have stories because Twitch had loyalty. His loyalty compelled him to help when needed and be present whenever possible. When he graduated, our loss was the Army's game. Just as he served us, he then served our country as a captain in the Army. He served bravely until 2011. Yesterday, we honored the lives lost in service to country. They died sacrificially so that we might live freely. Their lives are like embers of a divine fire, reminders of the one who gave his life so that we might live. They did something bigger. They died for something bigger, and now we have the chance to live lives in such a way that might be worthy of their death. Twitch gave his life, and as for me, I don't plan on wasting mine, and I hope you don't as well. But we're going to have to take a break. But when we come back from the break, like I mentioned, there's quite a recent spat of deaths that happened over the weekend, specifically Bill Buckner, who was famous. It was a batting champion, infamous for his World Series gaffe, died at the age of 69, as well as Bart Starr, former Green Bay Packer legend quarterback, passed away over the weekend. And what was so interesting is the juxtaposition between these two individuals. We remember Buckner at his worst, but we remember Starr at his best. So why is it that we often remember the worst about individuals to the extent that even in death, we can't remember the best? Well, there's some interesting research that's just recently come out that I think is going to be very illuminating for us when it comes to the positive moments and negative difficulties that I think will be interesting, that will illuminate this conversation that we'll get to after the break. But we're also going to be talking about what's happening at Mount Everest right now. To quote one individual, they said, quote, "It was like a zoo." Another climber, the 11th climber in the past 10 days, has died as they try to scale Mount Everest. What we see with Mount Everest is that looming risks that weighs before every individual that decides to take that up and try to mount that mountain. But what does risk have to do with the Christian life? Well, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then finally, before we welcome Gideon onto the program, we'll talk about a Gillette ad specifically that shows a dad teaching his transgender son to shave. What are we to make of this in the latest of the transgender movement as it's sweeping across the U.S.? What I believe we're seeing is the normalization of transgender individuals that number approximately 1.4 million individuals here in the U.S. So what do we think about this from a Christian perspective? Or specifically, what should Christians learn from this transgender shaving lesson? Well, we'll get to that. But first, we got to go to a break. But if you'd like to find out more information on today's news and articles that we'll be talking about, you can make your way over to the Point of View website, www.pointofview.net. And as well, we'll be over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You can share your question or comment online, and we'll try to get to over the air. But we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, two recent articles illustrate our uncertainty about the future of technology. One proclaims that more than 70% of U.S. fears robots taking over our lives. Another is a special edition of Time magazine that believes that artificial intelligence is the future of humankind. A recent Pew Research poll found that 72% of Americans express wariness or concern about a world where machines perform any of the tasks done by humans. This is more than double the number who were enthusiastic about the prospect. Perhaps the best example of the discontinuity between experts and the general public is the possibility of driverless cars. There is broad agreement among proponents of the technology that it would be safer than cars driven by distracted, drunk, or sleepy drivers. The American public disagrees. The author of the report says that people are not buying the safety argument about driverless vehicles. By contrast, the latest Time magazine special edition on artificial intelligence is quite sanguine about the possibilities of robots, computers, and machine intelligence. Each article explains the benefits to business, government, and the military. It explains how self-driving cars are safer and how we will enjoy various high-tech toys. Near the end, it does provide a range of reactions to artificial intelligence. Ray Kurzweil believes that AI will be achieved by 2029 and will be a great benefit to humans. By contrast, Stephen Hawking believes that AI could be the biggest event in human history, but also warns that it could be the last unless we learn how to avoid the risks. These are wise words and a good reason to be asking important questions about the impact of the new technologies. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We have been talking a little bit about what happened over the weekend relative to some of the losses of giants within the sports world. Specifically, we have legendary Green Bay Packer quarterback Bart Starr passed away over the weekend, as well as Bill Buckner, who was the legendary first baseman for the Boston Red Sox. But what we know about Buckner was something pretty interesting. He was a batting champion that was infamous for the World Series gaffe. What we won't remember about him is the man that was this veteran first baseman who collected over 2,700 hits in the major leagues. It was an individual that spent 8 seasons each with the Los Angeles Dodgers and Chicago Cubs. He had a career that spanned 22 years from 1969 through 1990. However, we will remember him most as a member of the Boston Red Sox for that ground ball that went between his legs in the 10th inning of Game 6 against the New York Mets in the 1986 World Series. That error allowed the winning run to score in a devastating loss of 6-5. The Mets would go on to win Game 7 and extend the Red Sox infamous title drought dating back to 1918. Now, granted, what we're finding now is that the last thing that Boston is experiencing is any type of drought when it comes to championships. Currently, right now, you have the New England Patriots that are the current holders of the Lombardi Trophy. They just won the most recent Super Bowl. You've got also another Boston team. You've got the Boston Red Sox right now are the current World Series champions right now. And right now, playing in just winning Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals was the Boston Bruins. The Boston Bruins, if they are to win the Stanley Cup Finals and become Stanley Cup champions this season, Boston will have 3 professional sports teams that are world champions. This has only been done, I believe, by 2 other cities throughout history. So the last thing that they're experiencing is a drought in Boston. But at this particular time, it was pretty weighty, one might say. You can imagine, knowing Boston Red Sox fans, the animosity and the passion they bring to the game, but also the animosity they brought to the individual that they believed ruined their chances to end that drought in time. Despite the fact that this is an individual that had 1 minor lapse, now granted a very devastating error, but what you continue to see as you look at Bill Buckner's career is a career that was defined by grit, that was epitomized. It was just recent. I was watching the clip during the commercial break. It was epitomized in 1990, I believe, in that particular season. Buckner coming up on suffering from bad knees, going towards the end of his career, the very last year of his career, getting older in age, hits an inside the park home run. And you see him running as fast as he can around the bases. One can't help but think that this individual refuses to listen to his body because he's so wrapped up in the opportunity to help contribute to his teammates. But this raises a question that I had. Though we remember Bart Starr, the individual that led the Green Bay Packers to the first 2 Super Bowl championships, though we remember Starr at his best, we dwell on Buckner at his worst. Why is that? Well, according to research, the brain handles positive and negative information in different hemispheres. Negative emotions involve more thinking and often entail more ruminating. One study found that the power of a setback to increase frustration is over 3 times as strong as the power of progress to decrease frustration. But fortunately for the Christian, God's thoughts are not our thoughts. He doesn't dwell on the bad, but forgives it. The scriptures say he buries it in the sea and remembers it no more, according to Micah 7:19. We may ruminate on our wrongs, but God keeps no record of them. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was right. Judging others makes us blind, whereas love is illuminating. By judging others, we blind ourselves to our own evil and to the grace with which others are just as entitled to as we are. Bill Buckner may be remembered by some for that infamous gaffe in the 1986 World Series. But for God, he remembers Bill Buckner by when he called out to him as Father. Transitioning to what's happening right now on top of Mount Everest, it was, quote, like a zoo, is what one climber describes the scene at the top of Mount Everest, which is the tallest peak in the world. It's suffering from overcrowding. A Colorado attorney added to the list of one of the individuals that have lost their lives this season at Mount Everest, becoming the 11th person to die on the mountain in 10 days. One individual expert said that the problem has gotten worse each year, with more climbers trying to make the ascent from the Nepalese side, as the number of permits granted from the Chinese side has been limited. Their deaths are tragic, but the risk is enticing. Valerie Reyna at Cornell University coined the fuzzy trace theory of decision-making. Essentially, she argues that people process information in one of 2 ways. There's the verbatim analysis and then the gist-based institution. Verbatim analysis focuses on the literal level details, while gist-based focuses on the bottom line meaning of the information. Younger people are more verbatim oriented, considering the odds and then rendering a decision. Older people are more gist-based, thinking through the odds and considering the implications of the risk going badly. For example, say, we'll just go ahead and throw a hypothetical out there. Someone is considering running with the Bulls this summer. Let's just say there's an individual that's considering running with the Bulls this summer and maybe leaving the U.S. from Dallas in July 3rd, going up to Coney Island on July 4th to see the hot dog eating contest, and then making his way to Pamplona on July 5th, running with the Bulls on July 6th, and then making his way back to the U.S. around July 9th. Let's just say someone that we all know and understand is considering running with the Bulls this summer. as just an example, you have a small chance of encountering a bull. That's going to be the conclusion reached by the individual that thinks through the risk with a verbatim analysis. But there is a significant loss if you meet the bull. That's the gist-based intuition. You see, one person is considering just the sheer odds of encountering it. The other person is considering the implications of if you do encounter it. You see, in the biblical narrative, Jesus compares the kingdom of heaven to a man who took a risk. This man counted the cost and risked it all to purchase the treasure hidden in a field, according to Matthew 13:44. You may not climb Everest, but you cannot follow Jesus without taking a risk. And finally, let's go to this Gillette ad showing a man teaching his transgender son to shave. A man's first shave is a milestone no matter who you are. But for the transgender man Samson, it was memorable for several reasons. Brown shared the experience with a man identified as his father in an advertisement for Gillette, the maker of razors and shaving supplies. Growing up, he says, I was always trying to figure out what kind of man I wanted to become, and I'm still trying to figure out what kind of man I want to become. I always knew I was different, Brown said in the video. I didn't know that there was a term for the type of person I was. What should Christians learn from this transgender shaving lesson? Before we get to the answer, consider a few facts. The Williams Institute estimates that there are 1.4 million transgender Americans. 37% of Americans know a transgender person. So consider those implications. Only 1.4 million transgender Americans, but in a country of around 340 million. But 37% of Americans know a transgender person. So the degrees of separation is pretty sizable, yet is decreasing as we speak. A recent study found that 64% of consumers want brands to take stands on social issues. As brands continue to give consumers what they want, Christians must show consumers what they need, which is Jesus. The transgender movement has largely followed Marshall Kirk's playbook. In 1987, Kirk penned The Overhauling of Straight America. It appears the transgender movement has now transitioned into step 2, normalization. Today, we live in a world where Caitlyn Jenner is a household name, Laverne Cox adorns the cover of Time magazine, and dads teach their transgender children how to shave. Transgenderism may become the status quo, but Jesus disrupts societal equilibrium. In the kingdom, thieves become philanthropists. The lame walk, and the impossible is possible. We may not win this culture war, but we must remain faithful to the Creator. We have got to go to a break, but when we come back from the break, we're going to be joined by the Faith and Education Coalition's Executive Director, Girien Salazar. He's going to help us understand some of the latest research out by the Pew Institute that finds there's a critical gap in college success between low and high income students. But there are 3 reasons for hope. We'll be reviewing some of those with Girien when we come back, right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Tuesday, May 28th, 2019 day. And now I'm joined over the phone by Girien Salazar. Girien serves as the director of the Faith and Education Coalition for the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, the NHCLC. Prior to serving in this capacity, Girien taught English in Mexico, served as a member of the National Reserves, including 2 deployments, and worked as an associate professor for the Latin American Bible Institute in San Antonio, Texas. Girien is currently finishing up his PhD work at Dallas Baptist University. Girien, how are you today?
Hey, good afternoon, Nick. It's great to be with you today.
And as always, our listeners do know Girien and I have been going back and forth. Now, we don't know if his heart is completely mended from the Spurs' early departure from the NBA playoffs, but we would be remiss if we did not hear your expert analysis and perhaps a prediction going into the finals, which starts on Thursday. Okay, so Girien, we've got the wonders from above with the Raptors right now. And Kawhi, and then we've also just the juggernaut that is the Golden State Warriors. What are you thinking about that series right now?
You know, I'm excited to see it. I think we've got 2 different distinct basketball styles. But you know, I posted this the other day that I was just kind of heartbroken to see Kawhi Leonard playing for another team. But at the same time, I love seeing him dominate the game and doing what he does best. And you know, I'm going to go on the official record here, and I'm going to call out. I'm going to say Raptors in 7.
Whoa, that is a hot take right there.
Yeah. You know, people. I think one of the things that stands out to me about the Raptors is that Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green have experience guarding Klay Thompson and Stephen Curry.
Yeah,
and I think that they know how to work that system, and they've held them down in the past. And so I'm interested to see what experience they bring to the basketball court for this series, and if Kevin Durant, Boogie Cousins will come back to the court. I mean, that'll change up some dynamics. But have me on record, Raptors in 7.
My goodness, that is a hot. So you think that even if you think so, here's how I'm of the opinion. Kevin Durant is the cherry on top. The Warriors are championship material, regardless of whether Durant's in the game. Personally, now that's shocking. So how do you think they're going? How do you think they're going to account for Steph? How do you think they're going to account for if Steph? Okay, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say this right here. We got to go back a couple of years. Remember that the Spurs were up on the Warriors by 20 points before Kawhi goes down.
Yep.
When Kawhi is on the court, he he halts people just by his mere presence. He's got long arms.
Fair.
He's got a huge width, huge shoulder breadth, and I think he's just a presence in the paint. And so, you know, I think that's just one thing that the Warriors haven't dealt with over the past two years. They haven't gone through Kawhi when he's at his best. And I think they're going to have their hands full.
That is quite a hot take. That one might say that's a gap between the fantasy that is in your mind and reality of what's going on. Which, speaking of gaps, let's get to an article that I think you would find very interesting that we've been talking about a little bit, and we kind of previewed right before the break. There was a new study that was put out that found there was a critical gap in college success between low and high income students. Now, according to the Pell Institute, it calls it the Indicators of Higher Education Equity, a report that was released last week. They showed that there's a large disconnect between the resources required for students to enter and complete college and the assistance and public support they get. Help us to understand this, Gideon.
Well, I think one of the things that people need to understand first and foremost is that the big goal right now for Hispanic students is not just getting into college. I mean, that has been a huge goal for many the past years, but high school dropout rates for the Hispanic population is going down, and the amount of Hispanic students entering into college is going up, and that's great. But one of the things that hasn't been changing or has been lagging is that the amount of Hispanics actually coming out of college with a bachelor's degree is just waning. I mean, it's just not growing. And so that is a crisis happening within the Hispanic community. I think of it from the perspective of just being Christian, knowing that God has a purpose for my life, knowing that he's calling me to speak into different spheres of influence, knowing that he's calling me to do something. And that's true for many Hispanic Christians around the nation. But how much more equipped can we be and prepared for God's calling when we have a college degree, when we've gone through some pruning and some refining, and we're ready to do his work more equipped and better off. And so that's one of the things that just it disheartens me, because I know that there are many Hispanic students out there that would benefit, and the kingdom of God would benefit if Hispanic students could be more aptly prepared as they enter into the workforce, as they enter into God's calling for them after high school. So looking at this study, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, just looking at this study, one, just understanding that we need resources to not only help us get into college, but also complete college. One of the statistics that just kind of is something we have to deal with, wrestle with, good or bad, however you want to put it. But they found an outcome gap between students of low-income families and high-income families. Students from low-income families have a 21% chance of earning a bachelor's degree in 6 years. And students from high-income families have a 57% chance of earning a bachelor's degree in 6 years. And so that's the outcome gap, right? But then you go down into it a little bit more, and you look at the students, based on their test scores also. And the study shows that students that have a low test score, and they're from a high-income family, they have a 71% chance of being affluent by the age of 25. And then you go to students with high test scores, but they're from low-income families, they have a 31% chance of being affluent by the age of 25. So we got to understand that it's not just a matter of, hey, are students working hard enough? Are they studying enough? But what are the actual dynamics? And there can be economic factors, they could be cultural factors that are at play with students in the college process that are causing them to drop out, that are causing them not to have the same success that students of high affluence are achieving.
So help us understand that. Like, what are some of those? Can you think of anything specifically? Are there certain dynamics, as you mentioned, that are at play right now that are really hindering Hispanic students from being able to achieve success in the classroom on the college campus?
Yeah. Well, number one, Nick, and I've said this before on the show, is just the economic resources. Do they have enough money to pay for college? That's number one. So this plays out a couple different ways. This article that we both have our eyes on, it reveals a kind of I don't think this is new, but it's something that kind of just good to understand, is that in the mid 1970s, the federal Pell Grants that you apply for FAFSA, and oftentimes if you're from a low income family, you receive a certain amount of Pell Grants. But those Pell Grants in the 1970s, they used to cover about 66% of college costs. Well, today in 2017, those grants are only covering about 25%. And so, yes, those grants are good. They're helping us get into college, but at the same time, it's leaving a huge gap of those college costs that are needed to be covered. So, this is not something that is frowned upon, but having to work while you're also going to college is very difficult. I was fortunate enough that I didn't have to work while I was going through college, but I know many students who do. And so when you're at work, those are study hours, right? When you're at work, those are writing for my class and putting in the extra hours to get a good grade in class. And so that's one dynamic that we could think about. But also another one that we're seeing is just that Hispanic students, and this is not just related to Hispanic students, this is students who are coming from low income neighborhoods, is that they're going to schools and they're getting out of high school, and these schools are not preparing them for college. So they're getting their high school diploma, but it is not a diploma that indicates that the child is college ready. So that means when he's going into college, he's taking remedial courses, she's taking remedial classes, and those are classes you're not getting credit for. So those are some of the dynamics that I think they're just college readiness and just having the finances to actually pay for college.
Well, we've got to take a break right now, but when we come back from the break, Gideon, one of the things that I'm going to be really interested in talking with you about, you've brought up like a very illuminating point relative to the Pell Grants, not necessarily funding as substantively as what it did when it was first introduced. And it raises a question for me that I've been wrestling with for a little bit now. Is this a government issue to be addressed, or is this a higher education problem that needs to be worked out? So specifically, is the inflation of the tuition and the cost to go to college something that's a result of higher education institutions that are just largely providing a number of resources and services that aren't necessarily productive or necessary for higher education? Or is this a government issue that needs to be addressed specifically by funding not only higher education institutions more, but also providing more funds to college students? So we're going to have to take a break, though. But when we come back from the break, more with Girien Salazar of the Faith and Education Coalition. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It's always interesting to read how the mainstream media views things like the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial. Linda Greenhouse of the New York Times recently authored a lengthy commentary. Her conclusion? That the folks trying to destroy the memorial are going to lose. But that's about it for the good news. According to Greenhouse, there is a growing faction of conservative justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. These justices are increasingly committed to interpreting the First Amendment's Establishment Clause as permitting the display of religious symbols on public property, and the Free Exercise Clause as providing, in her words, robust protection for believers. To Greenhouse, this is not good because, she says, the heart and soul of a diverse country is going in one direction while the Supreme Court is hurtling in the other toward a destination fraught with uncertainty and danger. Well, that's factually untrue. For one thing, according to recent polling, 80% of Americans agree that memorials using religious imagery to remember our war dead is perfectly reasonable. Those are the real heart and soul of this country. Removing religious imagery from public display does not make us more diverse. It sends a message contrary to the Constitution's promise that religion in America is to be respected in personal and public life. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Let me ask you, what if America's best attorneys from the very top law firms got together to defend religious freedom in court? That's exactly what's happening at First Liberty. And the best news? We're winning over 90% of our legal actions. Come learn more at firstliberty.org. You'll be encouraged. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, joined over the phone by Girien Salazar, who's the director of the Faith and Education Coalition. Been talking with him specifically about some of the work that's been coming out relative to the high-income and low-income students, the growing disparity between those that are getting into college and then those that are actually graduating from college and experiencing success. One of the things that Gideon pointed out that I thought was a really interesting point is the buying power, I guess you could say, the significance of the Pell Grant that's for students today. When it was first initiated, I believe Gideon illuminated that it was at around 66% and the 60% of how much he was actually subsidizing and helping out to fund college education for college students. But now that number is at 22%, and it raises the question relative to the debt that we've been talking about. Specifically, we were talking about just this last week, is this growing debt that many college students were trying to figure out. Is this a government problem, i.e. the government needs to provide more funds to college students to be able to get to school? Or is this a higher education institution problem? Specifically, do these institutions need to rework and start cutting back on their services in order to not weigh down college students on so much debt when they graduate from college? And so, Gideon, the question lies out there. I'll be really interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I'd be surprised myself if I had the right answer, the perfect answer. That's a very difficult question because, colleges, they do more than just get a student in the classroom, and just give them information. I mean, they're there, and a good college is going to want to provide resources that help the students succeed. And so I know that there are just a myriad of things you can think about, student services and career services. But I think those are things that are just need to be judged as to what's that college wanting to produce, what are they wanting to their students to come out with. So I think that I can't necessarily say that there are too many things being provided by the school or too many options, but that's something that every school, I think, just kind of has to deal with itself. I think when I look at that problem, I think of some schools that they want to maintain their selectiveness of students, and they want to maintain maybe this aura of prestige that maybe a university has. And I understand that dynamic. And so, but many of these schools that we talk about, not all of them have the privilege of being a school that's out of debt. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they've got things they've got to pay for, but sometimes some of these schools have endowments that far out, are just ridiculous amounts. I think I go back to the Harvard endowment, and this is obviously not a school that everybody can attend. Yeah, but their endowment, their number is just ridiculous. I don't know where it's at in the billions, I think, but I think that they still have to charge students. I don't even know how much it costs to go to Harvard, $100,000 a year. I mean, I don't know the exact number, but there seems to be how colleges are getting more money, but yet students are not receiving more money to go to college, and the cost is growing. So I think that we can say that there are probably things that universities are doing, are providing, or costs that they're creating that probably can be weeded out. I can't say what those things are, but I can say that I think the government being able to provide a subsidizing some of the education for low-income students is a must. I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to be one that says, college is for everyone or that everyone needs to go to college. I think that choice needs to happen by the student and his parents. I just don't want college, not going to college to be the default decision. I want that to be a decision that they make because they're weighing two different possibilities, good possibilities of going to college or starting a great career. Mm-hmm. However, I know many of these families. I know many of the Hispanic families that when they're about ready to come out of high school, the pressure or the having to be able to say we can't do college because we don't have enough funds, or because we don't. I see that. I see it all the time, and so I know that there needs to be the government there to be able to and just to provide supports. But however, that's not the only response. I mean, there are so many good, generous people out there that offer scholarships, and they're providing grants and so it's a holistic approach, Nick. But I'm not going to be here one that says the government is not doing enough. I think they're doing what they can. I don't think free college is the answer because that comes at a significant burden, I think, to the entire nation. Yeah. So I really don't have the perfect answer, Nick, but I think that there are just some things that everybody, from the college to government, we need to be more creative. Yeah. And at the same time, go ahead.
Oh no. So help me think about this a little bit with me, just because we're both very familiar with Dallas Baptist University. And one of the things that I'm just recently, the Texas State House just ended up closing up shop. They closed session. And one of the things that they passed was a significant increase by 4% in the tuition equalization grant, which helps provide students that are going to private institutions. It provides them state funds to be able to alleviate some of that debt burden or some of that cost that they will incur while going to private schools like Dallas Baptist University. But I also know at Dallas Baptist University, one of the things that I think is a distinguishing characteristic outside of just this idea of pursuing after excellence without forsaking faithfulness within the business, within the higher education model, this desire to commit to Christ and then the integration of higher education and the Christian commitments. One of the things that is also a distinguishing characteristic of Dallas Baptist University is there's a very much, we're one of the lowest tuition granting higher education institutions from a private standpoint in the state. Like, there's just great cost cutting measures and services that we just don't provide because we want to try to keep the price at a low point for college students, or at least at a lower than competitive, very competitive price for students to be able to reach out. Because the idea that a college student is going to graduate with $29,000 of debt on average this year, it's just, it's unbelievable. It's just very hard to be able to fathom trying to get a start in school, trying to get a start in your career when you're already working your way back from so much. And that's a small amount. That's just the average. I can imagine there's a significant number of individuals that are taking more than $30,000 worth of debt. And then that transitions over into, I think, what some of the things that you're alluding to, was especially among some of the lower income students, that they may not have learned lessons about how to handle debt, about how to handle their finances. And that's something that's not learned in the classroom, but those are lessons that are learned in the family, in the home. And if those lessons aren't learned in the home, it's setting them up for failure when they graduate school and have that looming amount of debt.
You're right. And I applaud many of the companies nowadays that are hiring these students out of college, and they're saying, hey, commit to us for 3 years, 4 years, whatever, and we're going to help you with that debt.
Yeah.
I think that is just so creative, but I think it's so generous as well. And there's just so evident in our nation that this is becoming what was supposed to be a blessing can turn into a burden, in providing these loans for students and not teaching them correctly, parents not doing correctly, and churches can also help their students.
I think it really is. I think you've illuminated it. It's a community standpoint. So maybe we need to entertain the idea of government stepping up and providing more financial support for college students as they're making their way in. I think there's a room for higher education institutions to review the budget on some of the services and expenses that they're providing. And I think there's the free market perspective of, you really want high quality students. There's schools like the Lambda School, which is a higher education institution, that where you have these entrepreneurs that are hedging their bets. They're placing money on students and wanting them in turn to come and work for them afterwards to be able to work off the debt. I don't think there's one thing in particular. I think it's a community that's coming together with various skill sets helping the solution. But nevertheless, we've got to go to a break. Gideon, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Tuesday, May 28th, 2019 day. So grateful that you have decided to join us today. I'm joined in studio today for this Millennial Roundtable of Point of View by David Fraga. But then also over the phone, we've got Michael McAfee, who's the director of Bible engagement for the Museum of the Bible, also a teaching pastor at Council Road Baptist Church up in Oklahoma, and a diehard Thunder fan. But nevertheless, Michael, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much, Nick.
So great to have you here. And David, as always, good to have you here, man.
Absolutely. It's going up on a Tuesday, man.
It is a Tuesday, to say the very least. And so before we go ahead and begin, just so our listening audience does know, we've got quite a show for you all today. We're going to be talking a little bit about some of the recent numbers that have come out about the Southern Baptist Convention. Interestingly enough, there's been a drop in attendance and drop in membership under 15 million for the first time in 30 years. But interestingly enough, there has been an increase in giving as well. But there's also another interesting little stat that I think will be fun to talk about relative to kind of some of the younger individuals, millennials and Gen Z, leaving the Southern Baptist Convention. So we'll talk a little bit about that, implications for that, and the rationale behind that. And we'll also be talking a little bit about Mount Everest. As our audience knows, I am very interested in the idea of risk right now and some of the science and social science research behind that as well. Knowing the phrase in today's culture, you got to risk it to get the biscuit, but how even Jesus invites us into these communal riskets to get the biscuits. And so what does that look like, risk, especially in light of kind of what's happening on Mount Everest right now, which to the extent over the past 10 days, 11 people have passed away on top of the mountain. And then finally, we'll get to the latest from Gillette. And I'm not talking about a smooth shave, but a father in their latest ad, shaving and helping teach his transgender son how to shave as well. According to recent research, we've got 1.4 million transgender Americans here in the U.S. Around 36% of the American population knows someone who is transgender. And so what does that look like moving forward? Specifically, what can Christians learn from this transgender shaving lesson? And then I'll be joined, as always, by both David and Michael during the next couple of hours, but specifically we'll be asking you to participate as well. As always, we'll be opening up the phone lines and then taking some of your questions and comments on Facebook.com. But before we go ahead and get started, let's jump into the Southern Baptist Convention. That there's been a boost in giving up to $11.8 billion total, according to the latest research. But there's been a decrease in the membership. According to last week, membership fell to 14.8 million in 2008. It's the first time it's been below 15 million since 1989. But then if we look at specifically around some of the other numbers as well, there's been this kind of decrease away from kind of the Generation Z as well as the millennial generation that has been leaving the Southern Baptist Convention. So we'll start it off with Michael. As a Southern Baptist guy, he's getting his PhD right now from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, is a teaching pastor at a Baptist church. Michael, what do you make of these numbers?
Yeah, there's a lot behind him. I mean, first of all, we know that not only in this generation, but in every generation, that it is 20-somethings who often leave the church, who often take that time to kind of explore. And so in some ways, this isn't surprising, because if there's going to be a period that someone is least likely to be committed to a church, it would be this period of time. Now, the difference being, or one of the unique things about the millennial generation, especially in comparison to our parents or some grandparents, the boomers, is that we're waiting longer to get married, we're waiting longer to have kids, and so that kind of post, high school, college age before we settle down really is an extended period of being away from church. So some of the numbers aren't as, I guess, maybe surprising or alarming in that sense, and in the sense that, I'm not sure, you may have a bit more clarity, but in terms of being identified, it's certainly true that millennials and Gen Z don't see, we don't like institutionalized religion. And so if it was a polling that's asking how do you identify, it wouldn't surprise me that there are less people who identify as Southern Baptist and say, well, I just identify as a Christian broadly, or as, identify as non-denominational, even if my convictions are still Southern Baptist, and even if one of the largest, healthiest churches in Oklahoma City right now is a well-known church that most people don't realize is Southern Baptist, has become Southern Baptist, but the people at that church wouldn't identify themselves as such. And so some of it is kind of a question, in the details, but I do think that it speaks to the larger issue of within the SBC of asking ourselves, are we holding on to a cultural Christianity, a cultural of Southern Baptist of yesteryear that no longer resonates, and so we're kind of known as being the old guard, or are we open and willing to engage with the gospel in a new generation in new ways to raise up, be intentional about raising up young leaders to lead so that we can have a prophetic voice in our generation today.
Yeah, so David, this brings up a great example, because I think you find yourself in kind of that little bit of mix, right? So David, you graduated from Dallas Baptist University, so
Right.
do you have those Baptist distinctives when it came to the educational credentials? But now that you find yourself at Gateway Church as well, which is not Southern Baptist, but do you what do you take of the numbers when you see that among millennials and Generation Z are leaving the Southern Baptist Convention, Southern Baptist churches? What do you make of those?
Yeah, so I agree with Michael. In large part of just millennials, they're not just leaving Southern Baptist, they're also just leaving the church, because when they're going to college, most of them, especially in the Bible Belt area, they're raised up in the church. And so I know for me, I can speak, with my story. I was raised up in the church, but I wanted to explore. I wanted to see what else was out there. I felt like it was such just a stronghold in my life, like I wasn't free in a way. And a lot of guys that I talk to, they feel the same way. And so when they're in their 20s, they just wanted to explore, young 20s, but then eventually they start finding community, they start desiring the community. And so you see a trend of going towards like popular churches that have community-based young adults, ministries, large in part of like outreach ministries. They're having fun, doing games, whatever it is. But all that being said, what I do see is that there is this generation that is buying in when they find that community. Like they're giving everything they have, time, resources. They're even willing to take a pay cut in order to like serve, in order to serve even more so for a cause they really believe in. And so that's what I see a lot of millennials in.
Yeah, I'm really interested, and we're going to have to take a break right now. Just really interested as you continue to look at these numbers, only half of kids raised Southern Baptist end up staying Southern Baptist. Now granted, if we look to the past, we can look, and what Michael's alluded to, there hasn't, from a church standpoint, we're at a kind of a golden age where there's just been a variety of church offerings that really deviate from kind of historical norms, just the sheer amount of variety on the church front. But is this a reason to sound the alarms right now within the Southern Baptist Convention, and specifically among the leadership as well? We're going to continue talking about this, but we've got to take a break. But you can join the conversation if you'd like to call in, 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Your comments, do you think that this is cause for concern among Southern Baptists, or do you think this is simply just kind of a rhythmic pattern of life of young adults leaving the church? We'll be back, though, right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, two recent articles illustrate our uncertainty about the future of technology. One proclaims that more than 70% of U.S. fears robots taking over our lives. Another is a special edition of Time magazine that believes that artificial intelligence is the future of humankind. A recent Pew Research poll found that 72% of Americans express wariness or concern about a world where machines perform any of the tasks done by humans. This is more than double the number who were enthusiastic about the prospect. Perhaps the best example of the discontinuity between experts and the general public is the possibility of driverless cars. There is broad agreement among proponents of the technology that it would be safer than cars driven by distracted, drunk, or sleepy drivers. The American public disagrees. The author of the report says that people are not buying the safety argument about driverless vehicles. By contrast, the latest Time magazine special edition on artificial intelligence is quite sanguine about the possibilities of robots, computers, and machine intelligence. Each article explains the benefits to business, government, and the military. It explains how self-driving cars are safer and how we will enjoy various high-tech toys. Near the end, it does provide a range of reactions to artificial intelligence. Ray Kurzweil believes that AI will be achieved by 2029 and will be a great benefit to humans. By contrast, Stephen Hawking believes that AI could be the biggest event in human history, but also warns that it could be the last unless we learn how to avoid the risks. These are wise words and a good reason to be asking important questions about the impact of the new technologies. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, joined over the phone by Michael McAfee of Council Road Baptist Church, as well as Director of Bible Engagement for the Museum of the Bible up in D.C., Michael's located in Oklahoma, splitting his time everywhere. I think he's like Carmen Sandiego, if we pull out the millennial reference. Did you ever play Carmen Sandiego, Michael?
Oh man, it was a dream. I never got to, but man, that was the best.
Okay. So were you a more Oregon Trail guy? What were you like? What was your video game of choice growing up?
Oh yeah, man, I was all over the Oregon Trail.
Were you pretty quick? Were you a guy that was like the super quickest, or did you go kind of the medium pace, or were you slow, taking your time, hunting all the time?
No way, man. Closest distance between 2 points, a straight line. Like I just try to get there as quick as I could.
Bold, man. You're a bold player. Yeah. You're a very risky player, which will come in handy when we talk a little bit later about Mount Everest. And then we David as well, David Fraga. Were you a Oregon Trail guy?
Oh, definitely. Okay. Definitely growing up Oregon Trail.
Were you fast? Were you slow? Medium? What
took
were
my
you?
time.
You took your time.
Yeah,
Wow.
You got to make sure the family's healthy. You got to get them all
Michael,
there, right?
You can tell a lot about a man by the way how quickly he carries with his oxen. But
classic games.
Okay, but nevertheless, we have been talking a little bit about Southern Baptist Convention, specifically some articles out of Christianity Today. Some news was released this past week. Only half of kids raised Southern Baptist stay Southern Baptist. And, so, Michael, I want to come to you for a little bit. What do you think? I'm trying to get a better understanding of this because there's two streams of thought that are running through my mind right now. One, you've got a growing contingent of individuals. You always hear the line, they're leaving church when they're in their 20s, but then they'll come back. But I think that there's a sizable contingent that never went to church in the beginning. And so why would we assume that they would come back to something they never went to? And then the second line of thinking I'm kind of considering right now is this idea of what is it? What's the stickiness factor, I wonder, among millennials and Generation Z right now within the Southern Baptist Convention? Yeah, we can think about those that left, and and I hate to be so blunt right now, maybe they left because they were never of, and so it's just that therapeutic moral deism that many of them thought they had to be good instead of godly. Or like when you're thinking about some of these numbers, when you're thinking about some of those thoughts, what kind of comes to mind? How are you making sense of this?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. So you have the SBC is such a wide tent, right? That makes for incredible partnership for the gospel. I mean, it is why we have the pleasure of supporting the largest mission sending agency in the history of the world. Just in terms of the number of missionaries that every Southern Baptist church supports. And so, but with that, I mean, you have such a wide range of churches. I mean, everything from the hyper fundamentalist conservative to churches that would lean more moderate. And so there is that creates an opportunity for great partnership. But when it comes then to trying to ask, okay, what's going on? It's different for each group, right? And so there are some groups that are in an effort to be faithful, likely making the mistake of holding to tradition and thinking that holding to tradition is faithful rather than asking how does the gospel, how does biblical truth express itself in our day, in our culture, differently than it did in the 1970s and 80s. And then on the other side, you have some that have watered down the gospel to the point that the youth group involvement, participation is more about entertaining students and having them be excited because that gets a lot of students in the door. The problem is then when it's no longer fun, when youth group isn't the hottest ticket in town, they walk back out that same door to go pursue fun and entertainment where it's more readily available. And so if it's not the gospel ministry grounded in biblical truth, then it doesn't have sustainable impact. And so I think you're exactly right to say that kind of allude to 1 John 2 of perhaps some of the losses, quote unquote, that we're seeing are people who had a great camp experience and maybe joined the church or were baptized into the church, but never had a true heart transformation, or at least it hasn't solidified itself where they're seeing themselves growing and thriving in a church today. And in which, let me say this last thing, as a Southern Baptist, I don't care if any of these students are leaving Southern Baptist churches to go to other denominations that are preaching the gospel, grounded in biblical faith and truth, and are flourishing in their walk with Christ. I think the thing that we should be concerned about as Southern Baptists that see these changes are those that are leaving the faith or are leaving church not to reconnect to any gospel-centered church.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point that you make towards the end. And so, David, when thinking about that, there has always been individuals that have hopped around. Like, I grew up in a small town. Like, church hopping was just one of the things that would happen. I grew up at First Baptist Church, Cookeville, Tennessee. Went off to Grace Baptist Church when I was in Clarksville, Hilldale, and then when I was in college, Hilldale Baptist Church, and when I was in seminary in Southwestern, Travis Avenue Baptist Church. And so there is to an extent, there's always been this kind of movement that's happening, and we know that Americans are moving as they always have been. And so when you consider some of the work that y'all are doing at Gateway right now, what are some of those sticky components that you're doing to keep people not necessarily from moving for career advancements, but really keep them, one, not only engaged in the biblical narrative, but two, growing in the gospel? What is it that what are some of the best practices that are working for you all?
Yeah, so definitely we take Matthew 28 super seriously. Therefore go out, make disciples of all nations, right? And we believe a lot to do with equipping, discipling, teaching, and just just empowering. So we think that a lot has to do with the events we put on to just bring people in. We have a lot of people that come in from a lot of churches, when we put on a Gateway event, but we don't do it, just to bring other people in our churches. We do it out of excellence in order to equip those people so that we can send them out for them to disciple others, right? On top of that, what we like to do is a lot of community as well. And so we focus a lot in empowering our small group leaders by equipping them, by training them, in each semester and each just providing the resources they need. And so because overall, such a big church like Gateway, you're not going to be able, like the leaders, the pastors aren't going to be able to impact every single person, but they can empower others to continue to impact their influence, their circles, right? So all that being said, church hopping, like you said before, there's thousands of churches in DFW, man, and you see people do that all the time. When they don't like it, when they feel like they got hurt by a church, they're going to go to another church where they feel as if they will never get hurt there,
Yeah. So is this, when you think about holistically, Michael, when you think about some of these numbers that have been released relative to Southern Baptists, the kids are leaving Southern Baptist churches, when you think about kind of the drop in SBC numbers, overall take, do you think that this is just par for the course that this happens? Do you think that this is cause for alarm? Do you think this is cause for reconsideration of some of the practices that are happening in SBC? Or is it really just, it just requires a much more nuanced perspective, simply because, like you alluded to earlier, when you're talking about the SBC, you're talking about a zoo for all respective purposes. Yeah. It is just, you've got pastors and you got churches of all different swaths that are kind of finding semblance and finding unity underneath the title of SBC. So when you think about some of these numbers, just last hot takes that you've got for them.
Yeah, that's right. The sky is falling. The SBC is crumbling. It's time to jump off this sinking ship.
Religion is dead, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I think you're right. It's obviously it's nuanced. So again, on the one hand, there is reason to not be discouraged by these numbers, and kind of mention those the ultimate. The thing you see again and again are students that have an encounter with Christ that transforms them, that really, where they're able to read the Bible. The number one factor, if parents and pastors wanting to listen to this, say, how do we encourage and ground millennials and Gen Z so they don't leave, ground them in the ability to feed themselves from God's Word. It's the number one variable. And so apart from the Word of God and the Spirit of God, we'll all, struggle. And so, but then, I do think that the SBC has been in this moment for a while of reconsidering, okay, how do we express the faith in a new way? And there's a lot of new entity heads. There's some ways that the SBC has worked to try and educate on why and how they can help the kingdom. But in general, I think we're only going to see denominational lines blurred more and more, and especially of those denominations that are like-minded, that are strong, conservative, missionally focused, Spirit-empowered denominations. We should welcome a spirit of collaboration, and if that's a church working with the SBC, great.
Yep. So we have got to take a break right now, but when we come back from the break, we're going to shift conversations for a little bit. I want to talk about what's happening at the top of Mount Everest right now, but specifically with regards to risk-taking. We'll be back right after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by David Fraga here in Dallas, and also over the phone by Michael McAfee, the Council Road Baptist Church, as well as Director of Bible Engagement for the Museum of the Bible. You can find out more information on these killer guys. I mean, they're just great. I'm just grateful that they're putting up with me. You can find out more information on them at our website at pointofview.net, and then also find out more information. We'll have some of their kind of bios up on the Facebook page as well at facebook.com YouTube.com/Point of View Radio. While you're over there, be sure to go ahead and like that. And if you have a question or comment on anything that we're talking about today, underneath that live video box, you can see a little box there. You can place a comment or a question, and what you share online, we'll try to get to over air as well. And so hang with me for a little bit, fellas, because I've got a story that it's tragic, but I think illuminates something that I want us to be able to tease out a little bit. So we'll use it for illustrative purposes, and then hopefully be able to pivot from it. Some tragedies happening right now, kind of in Nepal, in the Nepal area. You've got Mount Everest, which is the world's highest peak right now. That's always had individuals that have been clamoring to be able to train for and then hopefully reach the summit of Mount Everest. Well, recently, what we continued to see over the past 10 days, there have been 11 individuals that have lost their lives trying to summit Mount Everest. There is a picture that has gone viral that one individual risked greatly to be able to take this picture, and what it shows is right upon the top, there's this long line of individuals that are trying to summit. And what they're finding is that you've just got to go into an orderly manner, because the summit, this pass, can only handle however many people, very limited number of people. And so what they find is individuals are just having to wait their turn and wait in line at the top of Mount Everest. It's a captivating photo that I can't help but continue to look back on. But this kind of illuminates something I think is what I would consider a growing problem that's looming underneath. And I can point to two data points in particular that point to this, is this aversion for risk that many individuals is characterizing many individuals here within the American experiment. Now, obviously, the deaths of these men are tragic, but this risk is enticing. And so the data points that I'm continuing to go back to right now is, one, the number of new businesses that are starting up, the number of individuals that identify as entrepreneurs, but the actual number of businesses that are starting up is reaching significant lows right now, which I thought was pretty interesting relative to, we're coming from a world in which it seems like, especially among millennials, everybody just wants to be an entrepreneur and work for himself or herself. But then also another, which is I think just as interesting, is kind of the love component, where there's just a less likelihood of high school seniors, so this would be more Generation Z, high school seniors that are even going out on a first date, because inevitably it takes a risk. And so the fascinating numbers are, it's 72% of high school seniors said that they went out on a first date their senior year in the year 2000. In 2015, that number had dropped to 51%. So that we're seeing this precipitous drop among taking a risk, even in your love life, but also in business life as well. And so I'm speculating right now. I'm going to project from those two data points and show that there's a lack of individuals that are taking risks right now. And then it always goes back to, for me, when we're thinking about the biblical narrative, following Jesus requires us to take some bit of risk. Even Jesus compares the kingdom of heaven to a man who took a risk by selling everything that he had in order to buy the field and the treasure within the field. He counted the cost, risked it all to purchase the field. And so you may not take the risk and climb Mount Everest, but you cannot follow Jesus without taking a risk. And so, Michael, I'm going to go to you. Do you agree? Do you disagree that we're more averse to risk in this on-demand 2019 Netflix world, or do you think that I'm way off base right now, and that I'm taking crazy pills, as Mugatu would say?
Yeah, no, not at all. No, I mean, there is some data. I mean, I would assume that it would depend on the area, but I've got a sister-in-law that's in high school, and so it's been fascinating she just graduated this year, and so to hear about her, not only her experience, but the experience of some of her friends bears the same data, the same numbers that I'm looking at with you. And I wonder, when it comes to the dating thing, how much of that is just the ability. In 2005, I mean, that was when I was a senior in high school, and while we had cell phones, we didn't have social media, we didn't have sort of this barrier of ways that kind of keep us from interacting with each other. We had to do that face-to-face, and so with her, she is very content to stay at home and interact with her friends digitally. And so, and it does change and shift not only the way you interact with others, but then what feels safe. It feels safe to play a video game, but if you go outside and play, you could get hurt or, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so, so there definitely is that kind of, shift in mindset of what is safe, and as Christians, we are called to be biblically wise, but certainly following Christ is a risk. We're told to count the cost and to forsake all that we have to follow him. And so I do think that the adventure that we're looking for ultimately is not going to be found on the top of Everest or playing video games in your room, but it's going to be an obedient walk of following Christ and the call that he has on our lives.
Yeah, you got to risk it to get the communal biscuit. David, help me to understand. Am I kind of crazy right now? Am I taking crazy pills? Do you think we're more averse to risk in 2019, or do you think we're just as risky as ever?
I think the risk has lowered just because of the intention has changed. So what I mean by intention has changed is you have all these apps, you have all these abilities to DM someone and just like message them, get to know them, quote unquote. But the intention for a lot of that is not really to pursue someone to date, to have a wife or to have a husband, you know what I'm saying? And so a lot of it is just to hook up. A lot of it is just to,
there's a level of risk involved with that, though, right?
Yeah, but
back to the question.
That,
back to the question.
Okay.
Do you think we're more averse to risk today, or do you think I'm making a big ploy out of nothing, that we're not as risky, or we're just as risky as we've always been?
I just think it's the perspective of the person.
Okay.
So in terms of like asking someone out on a date with that intention, that is a risky ploy, you know. But for the most part, we see a generation that doesn't see that as a big risk. At least from my standpoint.
Okay, so I'll ask this question, David. I'll start it off with Michael. I'm really interested in knowing how you come to reach decision relative to risk, okay, and from a biblical standpoint. So as I'm thinking right now, Michael, I'm thinking there's got to be some type of biblical theology. There's got to be a biblical framework, because the Christian life is to a large degree taking risks, right? You're taking the leap of faith, as Kierkegaard said. You're counting the costs, as you alluded to, and then you're making a particular risk. Now, granted, it's not always climbing up Mount Everest, but there are certain points that you're making to be able to assess what's before you and then to take the risk. So the Christian life is not avoiding it, it's weighing it, trying to figure out what are the risks that are worth taking right now. And so as you think about your process by which you make decisions and you face these risks in life, what does that look like for you? Are there certain steps that you take? Are there certain measures and precautions that you run in order to be able to assess and then eventually decide on the risk that's before you?
So one of my favorite books, and it's a very small book, as a matter of fact, if there's any high school seniors or whatever going to college, is a book I always recommend, is John Piper's Don't Waste Your Life, which there's a smaller version of just like kind of an excerpt of it called Risk is Right. And what he says there is a choice lies before you. Either waste your life or live with risk. And he really gives what I think is a great call to Christians, to young Christians, to say, hey, a life of following Jesus is going to involve risk. And so the two questions that I always encourage anyone that I'm counseling or giving advice to ask is, what can I do to know God most, and what can I do to make God most known? And the answer to those two questions often are in tension, but it at least provides I think, a biblical framework of, rather than orienting to what's going to bring me happiness, what's going to bring satisfaction to my life, to put a God-centered view on whatever the decision you're making is and go, yeah, this decision, this venture, this move might be difficult for me, but if it's going to make God most known throughout the nations, then I'm going to run towards it. Or if it's going to make me uncomfortable to be in a smaller church, and I'd rather just go hang out at the comfortable service that doesn't challenge me. No, I'm going to put myself in a harder situation where I'm going to be in a church that the preaching of God's word exposes my sin, and that's not going to make me comfortable, but it's going to make God known in my life. It's going to help me know him. So that's at least a starting point that I try and begin with when I'm talking to people.
Very neat. So we're going to have to take a break, but we're going to continue talking about risk when we come back. But I am really interested to know the decision-making process by which we assess the risks that are before us. And so we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It's always interesting to read how the mainstream media views things like the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial. Linda Greenhouse of the New York Times recently authored a lengthy commentary. Her conclusion? That the folks trying to destroy the memorial are going to lose. But that's about it for the good news. According to Greenhouse, there is a growing faction of conservative justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. These justices are increasingly committed to interpreting the First Amendment's Establishment Clause as permitting the display of religious symbols on public property, and the Free Exercise Clause as providing, in her words, robust protection for believers. To Greenhouse, this is not good because, she says, the heart and soul of a diverse country is going in one direction while the Supreme Court is hurtling in the other toward a destination fraught with uncertainty and danger. Well, that's factually untrue. For one thing, according to recent polling, 80% of Americans agree that memorials using religious imagery to remember our war dead is perfectly reasonable. Those are the real heart and soul of this country. Removing religious imagery from public display does not make us more diverse. It sends a message contrary to the Constitution's promise that religion in America is to be respected in personal and public life. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Let me ask you, what if America's best attorneys from the very top law firms got together to defend religious freedom in court? That's exactly what's happening at First Liberty. And the best news? We're winning over 90% of our legal actions. Come learn more at firstliberty.org. You'll be encouraged. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by David Fraga, the men's minister over at, Gateway Church, and then also have Michael McAfee that's joining us over the phone from Oklahoma and is the director of the Bible at the Museum of the Bible, as well as a teaching pastor at Council Road. We have been talking a little bit about risk, and Michael, when you were kind of alluding to some of the research or kind of the biblical narrative, I couldn't help but think about this fascinating study by Stephen Levitt, who is author of Freakonomics. What he found is there was this fascinating study. He put out this call for individuals that were facing a decision. Okay, and they were facing a significant decision with their life. And so this significant decision could be defined as individuals that were thinking about getting married, thinking about taking a new job, making a move. And he issued this nationwide call to say, if you're facing a significant decision and you don't care which way it goes, would you and you find yourself in a level of kind of pulled one way or the other, would you be willing to let me make the decision? And over 26,000 people responded to this call. And so 26,000 people were facing a decision, and they were willing to let an economist that they had never met before flip a coin to decide whether they were going to, what their fate would be relative to this decision, this risk that they could potentially be willing to take. Of the 26,000 people, they used this computer to flip a coin, and heads, yes, you were going to take the risk. Tails, no, you were going to stick to the status quo. What he found was that regardless of outcome, individuals that took the risk experienced greater levels of happiness than individuals who didn't take the risk, regardless of outcome. So you're thinking about this, just the sheer taking of the risk increased levels of happiness. I always think about happiness as kind of like this echo of joy, right? Like a reminder that we have a good Father that gives a good gift and is calling us to walk by faith as we make our way into it. So that raises the question, though. Michael offered us up the first, helped us relative to the decision-making process that he often counsels others when they're faced with the risk. So David, it's coming to you now. As you're, I mean, you've got like this piece of paper that is littered with this theology, I would assume, underneath
thoughts, man.
this thought-making grid. And so help us, what is the process? What's the grid by which you analyze the risk that's before you and come to a decision relative to that at that juncture in the point?
So one of the first things is I think about my expectations, honestly. Okay. Because we all have expectations of how, I mean, the outcome of what we would like to come out of a decision. Okay. You know? And so the first thing after that, the next thing I think about is, why am I doing this? Why am I making this decision? Because it kind of brings me back to my why, my identity. What am I doing this for myself? Am I doing this to glorify God? Am I doing this to build up something along the lines? And then once I do that, I write down my expectations and then I lay those down. Mm-hmm. Because if I have an expectation about if this is really to glorify God, I'm going to be disappointed. Like, I'm just going to be frustrated and disappointed, and I'm not going to be able to fully be able to allow God to work in me through that decision, right? But one of the biggest things that Sean Webb talks about, he is a psychologist, and he talks about how hacking your emotions. Essentially, it's identifying what you're feeling in that moment while you're making a decision. Mm-hmm. And when you can identify it, you can actually be less led to make an emotional, impulsive decision because you're able to identify that emotion in that moment. And so I obviously seek counsel. I surround myself with my community group of guys, bounce off ideas, and then I go from there. I make the best possible decision, trusting that God is going to lead me along the way.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. You know, there's a researcher, Valerie Reyna, she's out of Cornell University. She has this decision-making process that she calls the fuzzy trace theory. And essentially, she argues that people process information in one of two ways. There's the verbatim analysis and the gist-based intuition. Verbatim analysis focuses on literal level details, while gist-based focuses on the bottom line meaning of the information. Younger people are more verbatim oriented. They consider the odds and then render a decision. Older people are more gist-based, which are thinking through the odds and considering the implications of the risk going badly. For example, someone's going to consider running with the bulls this summer. You have a small chance of encountering a bull, which is the verbatim, but a significant loss if you meet a bull, which is just to say at the very least. And just say somebody's considering running with the bulls, and he just happens to be talking right now and is planning on going to run with the bulls. But nevertheless, when I'm thinking about some of these risks, I'm trying to think through so maybe Michael, you can help me with this as we're thinking through some of the implications for the gospel as we're making our way around the world. And you think about some of the risks and you look back at the past. Are there individuals that pop out in your mind when you think about these risks that have taken great risks and we're seeing the fruit of their decisions right now? I know there's got to be missionaries that you're thinking about right now, maybe pastors that took this great risk and now we're reaping the rewards.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's dozens of stories. I mean, not just, obviously, you can look at Scripture, but even just in the last 100 years. I mean, there's the first quote that comes in my head is Jim Elliot, right? Yeah. That he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And Jim Elliot and 4 other missionaries died in South America trying to share the gospel with the Waodani people, and were murdered for it. And now, in the next generation after their death, not only did their families go back and Christianize that group, share the gospel with them, saw the most violent tribe in the history of the world with the highest homicide rate. This is secular sociologists that confirm this. In one generation, went from the most violent tribe to one of the most peaceful tribes because they came to Christ in overwhelming numbers. So not only did you see that impact, but the story from there rippled out where there are literally thousands of missionaries on the field today that have testified that God used their story directly to call them onto the mission field. And so you think about the tragedy that was of these men that risked to move after they had, graduated from Wheaton and seemingly had, their entire lives in front of them, moved to South America to share the gospel with this violent tribe and were slaughtered. You would have thought, well, that risk bottomed out, that it wasn't worth the risk. But actually, in the long run, that we see through a glass dimly, that on the other side of these broken pieces of glass, that there's a beautiful mosaic that God is making that we cannot see on this side of eternity. And so that's one of the ways that we can have a solid confidence in a sovereign God, that if He is leading us to something that is risky, that rather than sort of seeking a comfortable or an easy life free of risk and then getting heaven one day, that we can risk it all for Jesus, knowing that even if we fail, that we're not defined, our identity is not in our success or failure in our vocation or in our ventures or whatever, that our success is defined on the cross of Jesus Christ. Yeah. So I think is a mind shift that we need to have to embrace risk in our day.
Yeah. I often think about failure is not a characteristic; it's an event, right? Like failure is something that happens, but it's not a characteristic that we take on. And I think about some of the long line of risk takers within the biblical narrative. You've got individuals like Ittai the Gittite in 1 Samuel 15 who risked everything with his family in order that he might be able to follow after David as he was leaving the city. You think about individuals like Deborah with Barak that risked it to be able to go. You think about Sisera that took the big risk. You think about just some of the disciples that took significant risks in order that they might be able to spread the word of God. And it's just a very, very sobering reality that we find ourselves in, that the Lord of the world, the Lord of the universe, is inviting us to take risks for the glory of His name. But from the biblical perspective, what we know to be true is that every risk is always well substantiated and well founded upon a God that provides for our every need. So even though there may be a risk of failure, you know you're in sure hands with the living God. We'll be back right after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, for this Millennial Roundtable of the Point of View radio show. I'm joined in studio by David Fraga of Gateway Church, the men's minister over there, and then also by Michael McAfee, who is at the Museum of the Bible, also a teaching pastor at Council Road Baptist Church. And to catch you up a little bit, for those that joined us during the first hour, we had quite a little bit of a conversation talking about the idea, some of the numbers around the Southern Baptist Convention right now. Many millennials and Generation Z individuals, upwards of half, are leaving the SBC right now, and what we're to make of that. We talked a little bit about that, and then transitioned over to talk about the power of risk, and specifically what are some of the decision-making protocols to help individuals take risk. And as listeners know, I'm kind of captivated by that idea of risk right now. Are we living in a more risk-averse society? And if so, what does it look like for the Christian that has been invited to this life of taking risks, of risking it to get the communal biscuit, similar to the reality that the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man finds, goes and hides again, and risks everything in order that he can buy the field. We're going to transition topics, trying to transition over, and we've got a couple of things that we'll talk about. But one of the first things that we're going to talk about is the transgender shaving lesson that was given. And so for those of you that are unfamiliar with what's happening, you can make your way over to the website, pointofview.net, to find the show notes, find out more information on the two guests, as well as find out information on this new commercial that was put out by Gillette that I thought was pretty interesting, to say the very least. And so Gillette, the maker of shaving products, I guess you could say, says, quote, "A man's first shave is a milestone, no matter who you are." And before we move any further, I can agree, and I can't wait to get to that first milestone, fellas. I know, Michael, I know that you are a man that has a very robust and very classy and just a weighty beard that I'm extremely jealous of. David walks around with 5 o'clock shadow all the time, and it creates unhealthy levels of envy within me. And so I know that first shave is a milestone, and I can't wait to get there myself. I haven't. One of these days, I'm going to not just grow patches like a little cat jumping nimbly from branch to branch. But nevertheless, a man's first shave is a milestone, no matter who you are. The ad starts off. But for transgender man Samson, it was memorable for many reasons. Brown then shared his experience with a man identified as his father in an advertisement for Gillette, this maker of razors and shaving supplies. He says, quote, "Growing up, I was always trying to figure out what kind of man I wanted to become, and I'm still trying to figure out what kind of man that I want to become," Brown said in the video. He says, "I always knew I was different, and I didn't know there was a term for the type of person that I was." And so this lesson has raised up a question I think would be very interesting for us to be able to entertain right now. What should Christians learn from this transgender shaving lesson? So Michael, let's start off with you, shall we? Your first impressions on watching the ad and trying to make sense of what's happening right now with Gillette.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, my heart breaks. I mean, for anyone that is struggling with gender dysphoria like this, and asking themselves, questions of, does the gender that I was born with match the gender that I identify with. It's ultimately at the heart issue a question of I'm not satisfied. I don't feel comfortable in my own skin, and the answer that's been sold to is that the correction of your gender is going to solve your problem, is going to bring you the fulfillment that you've been longing for. And in the same way that a young man that is desiring sex thinks that will fulfill him, and it doesn't, changing your sex or changing your gender won't fulfill you either. Ultimately, there are these longings and these pains within us that we have a desire to. And so there's an appeal to say, if I shave like a man, then I am a man, and then I'll find fulfillment. But you won't, which is why, you joking about your beard and your shaving experience, we understand that whether or not you have a beard or not, or shave, what your shaving experience looks like doesn't define you as a man. And obviously Gillette isn't trying to say that it does, but they are trying to help. They're playing into that narrative of as you take on tasks, they live your life as a man, you'll find a better life for yourself. And it's not, and it's sad. And the reality is regardless of what our struggle is, we all have something that we're chasing that ultimately is going to be a fountain that turns out dry. Mm-hmm. And so I think for Christians, we do need to watch it and be mindful not only of how we present godly manhood and godly manhood and womanhood, what that means biblically, that it's more than stereotypes, but also to remind ourselves that regardless of where we run, what pursuits we have of this life to look for fulfillment, it ultimately won't satisfy.
Good. So, David, your initial thoughts off the Gillette ad?
Yeah, so when I first saw this, I was a little bit shocked, honestly, that Gillette would be just posting this everywhere. Yeah. But at the same time, I think it just bothers me in a way, but not like in a condemning way, just more just in a, man, that this person's looking for identity and to be fulfilled for something. And I did think it was cool, though, that the father was trying to be as supportive as he could be, but at the same time, it's a hard place to be supportive, in, right? Yeah. And so for me, like, I don't have too many thoughts about it. I try not to look into that too much, but I am trying to learn more about how to respond to that.
Yeah. So. So I'll be interested. What do our listeners have to say about this transgender ad? Maybe you've seen it before. Maybe you've looked over on the website. We'd be really interested to hear from you. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. What are your thoughts on the transgender ad? The father teaching the transgender son about shaving. You can call in. We'd love to hear from you, or you can go over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, love to hear from you on your thoughts. One of the things I'm really interested in is just seeing how the transgender movement is rapidly growing right now. And so specifically, you've got 1.4 million Americans that identify as transgender. Just within the past 7 years, that has almost doubled in number. One of the things I'm also interested in is the number of individuals that know a person that is transgender. What the research continues to kind of indicate to us is that it does endure a great level of sympathy when you know someone that's kind of going through that, and it does tend to change some of your positions as well. According to the latest Pew research, 37% of Americans know a transgender person. But also, as we know within the area of business, that brands will give consumers what they want. And so some of the individuals would say, well, why are they doing this? This is just going to poison the well. This is just going to divide the country. They're going to lose profit because of this. Well, in reality, 64% of consumers want brands to take stands on social issues. And so they've taken a stand. What is your stand? What do you think of this Gillette ad that features a father teaching his transgender son how to shave? You can call in 800-351-1212 or facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, two recent articles illustrate our uncertainty about the future of technology. One proclaims that more than 70% of U.S. fears robots taking over our lives. Another is a special edition of Time magazine that believes that artificial intelligence is the future of humankind. A recent Pew Research poll found that 72% of Americans express wariness or concern about a world where machines perform any of the tasks done by humans. This is more than double the number who were enthusiastic about the prospect. Perhaps the best example of the discontinuity between experts and the general public is the possibility of driverless cars. There is broad agreement among proponents of the technology that it would be safer than cars driven by distracted, drunk, or sleepy drivers. The American public disagrees. The author of the report says that people are not buying the safety argument about driverless vehicles. By contrast, the latest Time magazine special edition on artificial intelligence is quite sanguine about the possibilities of robots, computers, and machine intelligence. Each article explains the benefits to business, government, and the military. It explains how self-driving cars are safer and how we will enjoy various high-tech toys. Near the end, it does provide a range of reactions to artificial intelligence. Ray Kurzweil believes that AI will be achieved by 2029 and will be a great benefit to humans. By contrast, Stephen Hawking believes that AI could be the biggest event in human history, but also warns that it could be the last unless we learn how to avoid the risks. These are wise words and a good reason to be asking important questions about the impact of the new technologies. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined in studio by David Fraga, as well as joining us over the phone, we've got Michael McAfee. We have been talking about the Gillette ad, specifically a Gillette ad showing a father teaching his transgender son to shave. And so we know from the Williams Institute out of UCLA, there's approximately 1.4 million transgender Americans. 37% of Americans know a transgender person. Recent study found that 64% of consumers want brands to take stands on social issues. Just based on your guess, Michael, just if you're thinking about this right now, do you think there's more positive or negative that comes from Gillette because of this move?
I would think positive. Yeah. I mean, I think that where we are in the sexual revolution, that as organizations, they didn't take a stand on LGBT issues until it was financially advantageous, and then as they did, it's been met with positive response. And I think it's important. I do want to say for Christians responding to this, I mean, I think that clearly a transgender identity within a Christian worldview doesn't fit. That said, I think it's really important that as we consider how we will respond to things like the Gillette advertisement, that we do respond with both truth and grace, that to help understand where people who are struggling with gender dysphoria are coming from, and to not lead out with a concern of normalize, which I think we need to have a strategic, intentional conversation about, but to also recognize, to have a heart of compassion for people who are wrestling with this. And so I think that there are, again, especially considering the commercial, it's looking at what I assume is a teenage boy who has come out of puberty and is not even 18 yet or whatever. And so there are certainly, you hate to see someone who is of that young age making a defining statement about their sexuality in the same way that we don't let teenagers get married because they're not ready to make a defining statement about marriage yet, that we should be concerned about it, but also to meet that with grace, I guess, as Christians, as we recognize people are struggling.
There's a guy. So Winston Churchill said that the further we look back into the past, the more clearly we see into the future. And I mean, as you look back into the past, one of the most influential documents to support, I guess you would call it the homosexual agenda. It's an article written in 1987 for Guide magazine. Marshall Kirk and Hunter Madsen wrote a book called The Overhauling of Straight America, which was later expanded into a book called After the Ball. And they kind of give a 3-step process by which they're going to be able to inculcate and to try to create space within the American experiment for homosexuals. And so the LG component of LGBTQI, and that it's come to be known. And the first step is desensitization of the American public concerning homosexuality. That desensitization is taking a lot of the emotion out of this particular issue. You saw a cultural manifestation of this with Ellen, the show Ellen, when Ellen came out on her self-titled sitcom in 1997. We saw the second step, which is normalization. And so the normalization is putting the emotion back into it, but not making it too charged. It's just open and frank talk that allows for the issue to become somewhat normative. So once Ellen came out, then we recognized that moving in next door on TV was Will and Grace, just becoming a part of the parlance, just the everyday experience of knowing a homosexual. Today, according to Pew Research, 87% of Americans know someone that is a homosexual. And then the third step is kind of the legalization protection. It's making dissenters look backwards that will allow a sense of shame and guilt to characterize those who share the same belief. And so we can think about certain protections. We can think about especially Modern Family, right? You've got the individual Jay, who's the father of his son being gay, and makes him look like he's backward because he doesn't believe in that same worldview that brings about a homosexual being a positive good. And so as we look to that, it seems as though the transgender movement is to a certain degree following that kind of dictum. You have the desensitization. You've got individuals like Laverne Cox, who adorned the cover of Time magazine. You've got what was there was an Amazon series, Transparent, I believe it was called, with people from Arrested Development that were on there as well. The normalization, you look no further than Caitlyn Jenner. That's a household name now. And now with dads teaching their transgender children how to shave, it just seems as though they're trying to, transgenderism may become the status quo. But as you've alluded to, Michael, that Jesus has disrupted, he tends to disrupt the status quo. The lame end up walking, the impossible becomes very possible. Thieves become philanthropists. And so help us to based on your forecast, as you're kind of thinking through this right now, before we entertain the question of how should the Christian respond, let's just think about it outside that perspective really quickly, and let's entertain this question of, do you see this transgender movement continuing to proliferate and become more prevalent in the American experiment?
I do. I mean, I think that as secularism continues to take root, and especially, I mean, we being here in Texas and Oklahoma and sort of the buckle of the Bible Belt, I mean, in some ways we've been sort of insulated from some of the cultural shift, although with the rise of the internet, information age, technology, we're all interconnected. It is the culture from the secular coastal cities that are the culture-making cities that are going to work its way into Oklahoma and Texas and other places around the world, really, not the other way around. And I say around the world, I mean specifically around the Western world, and maybe even a subset of the Western world that America has influence over. I think we should expect it, and I think we should then ask the question of how do we operate within the reality of that happening as the Church of Jesus Christ, and certainly be a public witness, but not see a a commercial as we're losing the culture war, that the culture is going to go perhaps the way it's going, and that our job is to be a countercultural people as the Church of Jesus that shares the gospel and the hope of a world where we're found, our image of God is found in us being male and female, redeemed in our bodies by a Savior who died in his body on a cross and then rose from the dead.
Good. Same question to you, David. Do you see this continuing to become more prevalent, populous across the U.S.?
Definitely, for sure. I mean, you just see it's just a sign of the times as well. You see how culture, like, the world is going to just continue to start falling apart more and more and more. And we're going to hear rumors of wars and just things like that. But all that being said, I also do see an opposing to it as well. I've seen a lot of articles. I've actually heard of a lot of movements and groups of people who used to be a part of that LGBTQ, groups, and now they're find their identity in Christ, and they're just loving on their brothers and sisters, going out to, beaches and clubs and whatever it is, but just loving on those people and attempting to just, share the good news, but at the same time, they're living a life where it's honoring and pleasing to God.
Yeah, I think I'm of the mind that this is going to continue to proliferate. This is going to continue to become more prevalent. I think you're starting to see, even in just the recent Supreme Court ruling that just was handed down earlier today relative to the bathrooms. I think we're going to continue to have transgenderism issues going to continue to grow. I think it will be interesting relative to the church's response as well. And that's one of the questions that we'll kind of tackle once we get back from the break, as what should the church response be to the transgender movement as it continues to become more prevalent within the American experiment? Is it to kind of fight against it? Is it just to accept it and allow it to become a part of the reality of being a Christian? What does that need to look like? And so, but we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to be taking some of your phone calls as well. I'm going to be really interested to hear what you have to say about the rise of transgenderism here in the U.S., especially within the manifestation of that Gillette ad as well. And so you can do that in one of two ways. Offer your comment or question by calling in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. You can call in right now, or you can make your way over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And what you share online, we'll try to get to over air as well. But during the break as well, we want to encourage you to go to the website. You can go to www.pointofview.net. While you're there at the website, you'll be able to find information on the article that we posted relative to the Gillette transgender ad, as well as a link to the video within that article as well that actually shows the commercial that we have been talking about. But again, we got to go to a break. But when we come back from the break, we're going to be answering your questions, answering the question, how should the Christian respond to the growing transgender movement that's taking place right now within the U.S.? We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable. We've got David Fraga that is joining us in studio, as well as Michael McAfee that's joining us over the phone. We have been talking about the Gillette ad, specifically relative to kind of a dad teaching his transgender son how to shave. And we've kind of danced around the question, trying to understand, one, the implications of it and kind of the cultural movement in it. The idea that, one, there's just going to continue to be the normalization, and two, I think we're all of agreement that this is only going to become more prevalent as the days move forward. And so that finally raises the question for us is, how should the Christian respond? Do we just completely reject it? Do we somewhat accept it? What are we to do? And so, Michael, we'll let you start off on this. We'll let you answer the question first off.
Yeah, I think leading with compassion is crucial, and recognizing that I think maybe one of the most distinguishing factors, the people of God have a different responsibility to their own inside the church than we do in a witness to the outside world. And so I would respond differently if a pastor was wrestling with gender dysphoria and wanted to preach and teach versus a congregant in the church who I want to disciple through it versus a commercial that I'm seeing on the television. And so I think it's just important that to keep in context the relationship that we have with someone or with an idea, and we do not want to be the people that are shouting down, because the problem with people with the offensive to the gospel that that transgenderism and that what some Christians might be frustrated with when they see this commercial is the frustration shouldn't be they're not living as a Christian should live. The frustration should be, or the emotion we should feel, is compassion that they are not worshiping the Jesus that we're worshiping, that they're worshiping the God of this world, that their sexual identity and fulfillment is their God, and that our hope for them isn't that we could create people that would live in line with a biblical ethic removed from a heart that is redeemed by Christ, but that they would find their fulfillment and joy not in the changing of the gender or in a life where they as a father or, they as a son, a transgender son, are learning to shave, but that they would find it in a life of discipleship. And so that's at least a starting place for us, is to be very charitable and to not to recognize what it is that doesn't sit right within our soul. It's that this person is not living their life in accordance with the gospel, and our commitment isn't to make them a Pharisee where their heart is unchanged, but their life looks like they are godly. But our commitment is for them to, as we are, to say that he who has been forgiven much loves much, and he who has been forgiven little loves little, that they would recognize that our own sinfulness, our own mess that each of us has keeps us from God, but the cross brings us back to him.
Yeah, I'm keenly aware, kind of echoing what you said. And David, we'll go to you, but I'll go first for a little bit. One of the things that I'm keenly aware of is that we're all broken in a variety of different places. And regardless of whether you're a transgender or not, we all stand in desperate need of a Savior. And so that should create and inculcate a level of humility when approaching this conversation. And because of that, for those of us that have tasted and seen that the Lord is good, there are two powerful components that were at work within us to bring us to this particular point, that, as Paul says in Colossians, that have transferred us from the domain of darkness into the kingdom of light, and that would be kindness and love. It was his kindness that led us to repentance, and it is his love for us that has transformed us to a great degree. And so I want to always be very generous with the kindness I show towards individuals, and I want to lavish the love that was lavished upon me as well. And so when I think about individuals that are transgender in nature, I am one of those individuals that are the 37% that do have I don't know if I would call him a friend, but I would say is an acquaintance of someone that I do know that is making their way through the transition process. And one of the things that I've realized very quickly is there's no way I'm going to be able to argue this person into the kingdom of heaven. That many of us are keenly aware. From my perspective, it's really easy to say, for me, he's being very unreasonable. But the reality is that he's not following a line of reason, not what I would see would be very reasonable. And so because of that, we know that when we're dealing with someone that is not operating within the realm of reason, you just have to let them experience kind of the repercussions of their decisions. And so it requires a type of long ball to be played, a longer view perspective to be played. And what do we know from the research relative to transgenderism? Well, we know from the research right now that there is a heightened increase for individuals, regardless of whether they get the transition surgery or not, that they will experience a life that the biblical narrative would say would be less than desirable, would not be the fullness of life for those that are following after the Jesus way would experience. We know there are higher levels of cutting. We know that there's a higher rate of depression. We know there's a higher likelihood for attempts at suicide. We know that there are a whole host and sundry issues and repercussions that come from living outside of even just the biblical narrative. Like there's a reason why the biblical narrative say that my commands aren't cumbersome to you, that they lead to the fullness of life and the completion of joy. Simply following after Jesus leads to the greatest amount of joy in your life, regardless of whether you're a Christian or not. And for the individual that's following after transgender, we know that there's going to be repercussions to their decisions just based on a humanistic standpoint. And so it requires me then to stick closely, to be a good friend with them and to be close with them, because if the repercussions based on what the social science is indicating follow, they're going to be in need of great hurt and they're going to come to a bottom. And at the bottom, they don't need someone to be able to say, I told you so. They're not going to need someone to give them advice, but to give them a hug, right? And I want to be the type of individual that's ready to give hugs, to want to love individuals, to express kindness towards individuals, to know that a gentle answer turns away wrath in those particular moments, knowing that I'm not going to be able to, I very rarely will be able to convince someone to my side, but I can try to love them and sow those seeds of love and kindness into them that I know to be true, that whenever they're coming from faith will never return void. The reality of the matter is that we worship a God that made a cross look like defeat, but 3 days later look like victory. Our love comes with a resurrected resolve that shows that even though we might not see the fruit of our labor in the immediacy of the moment, we do know that it will reap a harvest at the time that comes. And so I want to be very prepared for that. Hence the reason why I want to do everything that I can to speak the truth along the way, but to show my love as well, so that I can keep the relationship that if the social science bears out in their life, will eventually lead them to a life that is less than desirable that they would want and are going to be looking for opportunities to change. I hope that answers some of your questions. We've been getting apparently a lot in our inbox right now, as well as on Facebook, individuals that have been asking, how do I respond? And I think that's kind of my pivot. David, when you're hearing about that right now, trying to keep the relationship, trying to keep close, but not necessarily keeping quiet, your thoughts on how to respond to an individual that is transitioning?
Absolutely. So we're relational people. You know, relationships are things that change us in a way, but it's amazing because I like what you said earlier, how you're not going to win someone over by arguing, you know, by just pure reason. Like, that's just not going to work out, because man essentially cannot change hearts. It's God who changes hearts, right? Transforms. And the amazing thing about all of this is that we have a good shepherd that goes after the one, you know? And so one of the biggest things is being prayerful. I know that's said a lot, but truly praying for that person and being there for them is one of the biggest things that I don't know the perfect answer for, you know, being there for someone, but in the sense of being prayerful for them, letting them know you're there, kind of like you were saying, with your arms open wide for when that prodigal son comes back into the family, right? Welcoming him with a cloak, with a ring, everything kind of deal, with a feast, and saying, hey, you are loved. I want you, you know, and I love you no matter what the mistakes you have made. You know, you are forgiven, you know. So that's one of the biggest things, being prayerful and just being present, you know, continuing to build on that relationship and listening.
That's good. And so we have got to take a break, but we would love to hear from you as well. your thoughts. Well, actually, we're going to have to deviate from that because we have got, I almost forgot, ladies and gentlemen, you're on the Millennial Roundtable, and so now we've got news you can lose when we come back from this. And so there's some interesting social science research that I think we're going to have to play to, and that we're going to be taking. We're going to go around the roundtable and consider what individuals are thinking about this. But we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, the one and only time that we will be doing news you can lose. Oh, yes, it's coming. So we've got to go to a break, but we'll be back, though, right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It's always interesting to read how the mainstream media views things like the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial. Linda Greenhouse of the New York Times recently authored a lengthy commentary. Her conclusion? That the folks trying to destroy the memorial are going to lose. But that's about it for the good news. According to Greenhouse, there is a growing faction of conservative justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. These justices are increasingly committed to interpreting the First Amendment's Establishment Clause as permitting the display of religious symbols on public property, and the Free Exercise Clause as providing, in her words, robust protection for believers. To Greenhouse, this is not good because, she says, the heart and soul of a diverse country is going in one direction while the Supreme Court is hurtling in the other toward a destination fraught with uncertainty and danger. Well, that's factually untrue. For one thing, according to recent polling, 80% of Americans agree that memorials using religious imagery to remember our war dead is perfectly reasonable. Those are the real heart and soul of this country. Removing religious imagery from public display does not make us more diverse. It sends a message contrary to the Constitution's promise that religion in America is to be respected in personal and public life. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Let me ask you, what if America's best attorneys from the very top law firms got together to defend religious freedom in court? That's exactly what's happening at First Liberty. And the best news? We're winning over 90% of our legal actions. Come learn more at firstliberty.org. You'll be encouraged. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for
Point
truth.
Of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and coming up on our last segment, but typical of the Millennial Roundtable, we have got the News You Can Lose segment. That's right, News You Can Lose segment. So during the Millennial Roundtable, for those of you that are listening, one of the things that we like to do is we like to take some of the social science research out there, take a particular study, and just kind of go around the roundtable, see what we think about it, maybe bat it around a little bit, just understand that the times, they are a-changing. And so how are we to think about this? And so let's go ahead, and this is an interesting study that I found that was out of like this trade magazine. I thought it was so fascinating. And what the study found is that 1 in 7 millennials have never read a paper map. A new survey finds that just 18% feel very confident in their ability to read a traditional map, compared to nearly half of middle-aged adults. What's worse? 15% of millennials, about 1 in 7, said they've never even tried reading a map. That means there are millions of young adults that end up completely lost without a working digital device. Michael, let's go to you first. The idea that 1 in 7 millennials have never read a paper map. Are you the one that's a part of the 7, or are you a part of the 6? Michael, are you there? Okay, David, let's...
Yeah.
Oh, Michael, you there? Okay, so help us understand. Are you an individual that has never read a paper map?
Yeah, no, I have read a map. I'm more comfortable working with a map apparently than turning my phone muted on and off. And so, yeah, I'm very comfortable with it. And I turned to the maps in the back of my Bible often as a kid and would look at those and figure out where's where. Yeah, and
what a nerd.
Because it was a picture, I just wanted a picture.
Yeah,
I was confused by all the words on the page. So, no, I mean, I bet it totally makes sense. Anywhere I go, even when I'm going to work, I know the direction. I turn on Waze just to see where traffic is. So I'm definitely dependent on technology to get me places for the convenience of it.
So you're telling me if your phone went down, you're dead, you're in a new place, and you're only given a paper map, you can get there?
I think I could.
Okay.
I got some confidence in myself. Yeah.
Okay. I feel good about this. Awesome. Okay, David, going to you.
Well, it's definitely so for a map.
Are you the one that knows how to read a paper map, or are you a part of the 6 that have never interacted with a paper map?
I believe I'm the one.
Okay.
I grew up with 4-H, and so it was kind of like one of those things that it's a lost art almost. Okay. It's like one of those things like, oh, we get to learn how to read a map.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
Hey, it's important. You got to know the key and everything and what's what. But all that being said, definitely depending on technology. But if I were lost and I was given a paper map, man, I think I could get around.
You think so?
I'm pretty sure I could.
Okay,
for sure.
Well, for our listeners, there is no way I could get around. I would be dead in the water. I still get lost here in Dallas. So I've lived here in Dallas for like 3 years now, and I still am relying upon Waze, especially when I'm in a new area. Pretty much I'm just trying to gravitate and make my way towards either 75, which is one of the highways, or towards the toll road. Because I know if I can get there, I can find my way back home. But I don't know left from right, up from down, east, west, north, south. Like that is just, I am completely turned around. I'm a runner too. And so that's where I will literally just run straight when I'm in a new area because I can't deviate too far from the path. Do you just have that built-in sense, Michael? Do you have a good spatial intelligence that can help you relative to understanding where you are?
No, but I do have the ability to get in a general direction, and then I guess I should specify. Then I would definitely be the guy like running in finally after I've driven around for a while, not knowing where I am, and ask someone like, "Look, I'm lost here. What can you point to me where I am?" And so I may need some aid. Maybe I'm more a part of the 6 than the 1. I don't know. I'm familiar with maps. I can use them, but yeah, I mean, my wife is great with directions, and I go with my gut a little bit too much. I'm too. My intuition's fine. I'll be able to get us there.
Okay, so that brings up another interesting study. In 2010 study found that the average male drives an extra 276 miles every year as a result of being lost. Concerning females, that number is 256. Okay, so there's a 20-mile discrepancy there. So you're telling me, Michael, that you found that to be true, that your wife just has a better intuition, has a better grasp of where you are, and doesn't get lost as much.
Definitely, and she's more quickly willing to ask for help, and I've got too much pride.
Okay, so that's another. There's stats for everything now. 26% of men wait at least half an hour before asking directions or consulting their phone. You finding that to be true, David?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We like to fix problems.
Yeah.
We believe that we can figure out anything if you give us enough time, right?
Okay. And so here's the last little bit that's relative to getting lost. And so apparently we're not just getting lost on the road either. The average American spends 2.5 days each year looking for lost items. What do you think is the top misplaced item for Americans? Michael, we'll go to you first. Top misplaced item.
Car keys.
Car keys, okay. Car keys, okay. What do you got, David?
Glasses, sunglasses.
Glasses, okay.
Or regular glasses.
Well, coming in at number 4 were glasses.
Okay.
Coming in at number 3 were keys. Number 2 was the phone. And number 1...
Wallet? No.
The TV remote. We were looking. I feel like I'm Steve Harvey from Family Feud right now. The TV. Do you guys not lose your TV remote?
Yeah.
No?
It's
Okay. Well, so similar to Aladdin, I don't get lost, but rather I'm discovering a whole new world. And so I think this is inculcating a more level of humility that we don't know everything that we could be talking about. But nevertheless, we're so grateful that you decided to tune in. We're coming on the end of that. And so, Michael, one last time, some plugs. Anything new happening at the Museum of the Bible this upcoming summer? Anything you want to plug out there?
Yeah. We've got stuff going on literally every week. This weekend, actually, or next weekend, we've got, if you go to museumofthebible.org, we have a Bible that is a mile long, the Weedman Bible, that we're unrolling and opening up. And so you can join us on the mall for that. We've got Amazing Grace, the musical, that's happening every weekend. That's an absolutely phenomenal, can't-miss Broadway show inside the Museum of the Bible, telling the story of John Newton's conversion, and it's a great time to come to the museum. So if you have plans to D.C. or know someone that does, don't let them miss coming to see us for a full day at Museum of the Bible.
That's phenomenal. And David, you've got some new recent developments as well with some of the stuff you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Recently launched a nonprofit about a month ago.
Okay.
And so just been kind of keeping on the low, but you can always check us out at www.kingdominitiative.org.
Okay.
So that's one of the really exciting things that I'm hoping that is just going to be able to impact the kingdom and expand the kingdom. So
coming alongside in this media world, helping individuals be able to supplement as well as help cast a vision for the technological eye to help them understand the vision of these particular nonprofits. But nevertheless, we're so grateful that you decided to join us today on the Point of View radio show. So to end, there's more ways that you can interact with us. A couple of ways. First is through the Point of View website. You can go to www.pointofview.net. When you go to the website, you can find out more information on both David and Michael and how you might be able to further connect with them, as well as sign up for the daily briefing, which is my little daily email that I put out every day that highlights the top 6 stories of the day and the biblical perspective for that as well. And so you can sign up for that at www.thebriefing.net, or you can go to the Point of View website, pointofview.net as well. Or you can make your way over to the Facebook page. Go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Be sure you go over there and like the page as well. And while you're there, you can find more information on the show, as well as some live videos of the show, as well as some of the past videos as well. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Nick Pitts. I want to give a special thanks to Doug as well as Steve for helping out today on the back end. Our producers wouldn't be the same without y'all. And so hope you'll be sure to tune in tomorrow onto the Point of View radio show. Thanks so much. See you then.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.